I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Tianna Cobb, and I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of Oklahoma studying communication. And today, I wanted to have a conversation about mental health and mental well-being in relation to racism and discrimination. So as we all know, mental health is an integral part of our overall health and well-being. But unfortunately, mental health issues are prevalent amongst many of us. And these mental health issues that we experience often lead to other undesirable health outcomes and sometimes even death. But with that being said, we are starting to have more conversations to increase mental health awareness. And within these conversations, we are also starting to highlight many of the disparities affecting different communities, such as educational disparities, health disparities, and even financial inequalities. It is important to also continue discourse around the fact that these disparities not only limit communities from having access to certain resources, such as mental health facilities, but also that these disparities greatly affect one's mental health directly. So in this conversation, we're going to focus on racial inequality and discrimination and certain actions that you as an individual can take today to start making a difference. So first, it is important to understand that when we discuss racism and discrimination, it is something that is enforced, reinforced, and experienced both at an individual and systematic level. So individually, people experience racism both overtly and covertly. So overtly racism are things such as being called the N-word directly. And covert racism are different things like microaggressions that you may experience subtly but on an everyday basis. It appears that it is a bit more difficult for some people to understand systematic racism, but the concept basically sums up the fact that our structure and resources, such as our laws, our policies, healthcare, our criminal justice system, and even our educational system, have been created in a way to privilege white people in comparison to others. So these different experiences of discrimination and racism greatly affect the mental health of people of color, especially Black people. And these experiences often lead to, or even worsen, mental health outcomes and illnesses such as depression, anxiety, stress, PTSD, and much more. The more one experiences racism and discrimination, the more it affects their mental health. It is important here to also note that indirect racism and discrimination also affects one's mental health. This is really prevalent right now, especially for the Black community, with the protests and videos and conversations surrounding police brutality. So in other words, seeing another Black person experience police brutality or any form of racism for that matter in the news or in the media can be very traumatizing. It serves as a trigger or even a reminder of the fear that at any moment, this could be you or someone you love. And the scariest part, especially when it comes to police brutality, is that you have to fear those who are literally being paid to protect you. And then you have to find ways to protect yourself and your community and the people you love. Now, I won't go into much detail about the habitual nature of these experiences, but I will say that they often lead to unhealthy coping behaviors, which directly affects our mental health as well. And until we are able to break this cycle, such behaviors will continue to persist and Black mental health will continue to take a hard hit. And so as mentioned, there are endless ways that you can help break the cycle. But today we will focus on some things that you as an individual can work on right now to gain better insight and understanding, which is the first step to taking action. So first, we have to listen. And when we listen, we must do so with the intent to understand and empathize. Empathy is very important here. And I've come to learn that many people believe empathy and sympathy are synonymous or may not really understand the difference between the two. So empathy is where you imagine yourself in certain situations or experiencing certain emotions. Sympathy, on the other hand, is where you simply feel pity or sorry for someone. So empathy requires a level of understanding. You must imagine yourself as that particular person in that particular situation. Now, if you aren't Black, then yes, it will be more difficult for you to imagine yourself in a Black person's shoes, but that does not mean you cannot empathize with them. As one is walking you through a situation or an experience of racism or discrimination, you must imagine that you are in that situation yourself and think about how it will make you feel. Now, if it's difficult for you to imagine yourself in that situation, imagine that it is someone you love dearly in that situation. And there's one thing you should always remember whenever we are empathizing with others, is that if we haven't experienced that ourselves, any feelings of uneasiness that you may be experiencing just from hearing those stories is only a fraction of what they may be experiencing every day. And that is very powerful. When we are listening to someone share their experiences and thoughts, we must also work on remaining quiet and being completely attentive. Now, many of us listen with the intent to respond, but in reality, that isn't listening at all. It is very difficult to process what someone is saying to us if we are literally forming our rebuttal as they are speaking. This is not to say that we should not engage in conversation or that we should not have some type of response, but instead allow yourself to process what that person is saying before you form a response. Because you never want to invalidate someone else's experiences with your rebuttal or with your response, especially when you've never experienced that situation yourself. Also, to be completely attentive, we must learn to halt our defensiveness. So sometimes, and this is for everyone, we do need constructive criticism in order to improve ourselves. And so we have to work on being receptive. Now, I know this is easier said than done, but this is something that we must actively work on doing. And sometimes we become defensive in situations where people aren't even talking about us specifically, but because the person looks like us, it is easier for us to take offense. Now, when one does this, they are one, making the situation about themselves and typically victimizing themselves, which you really want to refrain from doing. You don't want to turn someone's experiences into a story or a situation about you and your feelings. And two, you then again begin to invalidate someone's experiences simply because they are not your own, which in itself is an act of privilege and entitlement. So just because you haven't experienced something doesn't mean it's not occurring in someone else's lives. And even with similar experiences, they affect people differently. So aside from listening, another thing you want to do is to speak up. And when I say speak up, I mean speak up when no one is around. So speak up to your community, speak up to your family, speak up to your friends when the people who are being discriminated against aren't around. And lastly, for those of us who are doing this work, please take time for yourself and take time to recoup. So we all have a threshold. Some of us can take in more than others, but you have to figure out your own threshold. So when you get close to it, you can pull back and you can recoup. And then you can go back in and start the work again. There is a quote that I love and I would like to leave you with. You cannot pour from an empty cup. In other words, you always have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of others. Thank you.